Welcome to Cybercast, decoding today's cyber issues. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research, and today we have an interview with EPA cybersecurity leaders Douglas Vick and David Travers. Together, they discuss efforts to increase cyber awareness in the water sector and ensure system resiliency. This interview was conducted by staff writer-researcher Nikki Henderson. Let's take a listen now.
I'm so happy to have Douglas Vick and David Travers from the Environmental Protection Agency joining me today. They will be talking about what EPA is doing to keep our drinking water safe, the role emerging technologies are playing when helping the agency counter threats like malware, and how the EPA is overcoming some of its cybersecurity challenges. So before we begin, Douglas and David, can you please introduce yourselves and give just a brief description of your roles at EPA?
Sure. My name is Doug Vick. I'm the Security Operations Center Manager for the EPA. I've really only been with the agency for about a year. Most of my experience before this has been with the Department of Defense. And what I do is manage the day-to-day security operations for the agency, usually focusing on vulnerability management and incident response.
Yeah, Nikki, this is David Travers. I'm the director of the Water Infrastructure and Cyber Resilience Division here at EPA. Unlike Doug, our mission is largely external, which is that we focus on cybersecurity practices at water and wastewater utilities, as opposed to Doug's focus on, I believe, EPA's cybersecurity practices. I've been with EPA for over 20 years. I'm an environmental engineer, and we have a staff of about 40 folks working on all hazards, security and resilience as it relates to the nation's 150,000 public water systems and about 16,000 wastewater systems.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you both so very much. Well, now we can just go ahead and dive into our conversation. Doug, how is guidance from the National Cyber Strategy helping EPA make the nation's public water systems more resilient to cyber incidents and ensuring that drinking water is safe for all communities?
As I said, our mission is focused on the external preparedness and resilience efforts of water systems. So this question falls within our bailiwick. So the first of I believe, the 5 pillars of the National Cyber Strategy is defending critical infrastructure, I think, which underscores the importance of protecting our nation's critical assets, including water and wastewater systems, from cyber threats. So within this pillar of defending critical infrastructure, and I should say there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors, water and wastewater systems constitute one of those sectors. So within this pillar, the strategy articulates the expectation that federal entities called sector risk management agencies, or SRMAs for short, and these SRMAs are the federal agencies which have the lead federal role in interfacing on a daily basis with their respective critical infrastructure sectors, and EPA is designated as the SRMA for water sector systems. Anyway, the strategy underscores that these SRMAs, like EPA, will support owners and operators of critical infrastructure, such as water systems, in their efforts to protect their IT and OT systems, so the informational technology and operational technology systems. So to this end, EPA provides a suite of tools, training, technical assistance, and funding to the water sector. So for instance, the EPA, my division, we offer the Cybersecurity Evaluation Program, which will conduct a cybersecurity assessment for individual water and wastewater systems. And then we'll generate a report that highlight any gaps in cybersecurity and provide that to the water system for their consideration. So we also offer something called the Cybersecurity Technical Assistance Program to support states and water systems and contractors in implementing cybersecurity measures. And under this effort, users can, like states or water systems, can submit questions or consult with a cybersecurity subject matter expert, regarding how to assess and improve cybersecurity practices. And we try to get back to individuals within 24 to 48 hours of receiving the request. And Nikki, just very briefly, another pillar that's of great relevance to cybersecurity and water systems involves, the pillar is something like shaping market forces to improve cybersecurity. And under this pillar, the federal government is called on to leverage available federal funding sources to promote cybersecurity. So EPA has emphasized the eligibility of cybersecurity projects under our multi-billion-dollar drinking water and clean water state revolving fund programs, which provide monies to the states, which turn around and give them to drinking water and wastewater systems. We also have the Infrastructure Resilience and Sustainability Grant to similarly provide cybersecurity support. And another federal agency, because it's not only EPA that occupies this space, the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also provides grant funding for cybersecurity of water systems. And finally, we also requested about $25 million in the budget for a competitive grant that would help systems build the necessary cybersecurity capacity to address evolving threats. So those are a couple pillars that relate directly to EPA's water security mission. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate you breaking that down for us. Well, ransomware has become a major concern for EPA following significant cyber attacks on several water treatment facilities. What emerging technologies are being used to better protect these facilities, as well as pumping stations from malware and other threats?
Sure, Nikki. This question is for me again. And to confirm, you are correct. The majority of cyber attacks against water systems do involve ransomware, which can be highly disruptive to a water utilities and wastewater utilities business and communication processes. Usually does not interrupt or have the potential to interrupt water service itself. And these attacks are commonly executed, as you probably know, through various phishing or social engineering schemes. What's interesting for the water sector, and I'll promise I'll be brief here, is that ransomware attacks, they generally target the IT or business enterprise side of utilities. So things like billing, accounting, email systems, that sort of thing. But, and this is an important point, and why I wanted to make it, is recent incidents at several water systems and high-profile attacks, such as the Colonial Pipeline attack, JBS meat processing, underscore how an attack on the IT side from ransomware can affect the operational technology or OT side. So for the water sector, the OT side would mean the ability of utilities to deliver and treat safe drinking water or collect and treat wastewater. So I just wanted to mention that. And just in case you're unfamiliar with the water sector, water and wastewater facilities use operational technology to monitor and operate virtually all aspects of their systems, from the intake to distribution. So OT is pretty pervasive in our sector. I would like to push back a little bit on the premise of the question, which implies that an effective countermeasure to a cyber threat would necessarily involve a technological solution, often expensive and perhaps incomprehensible to a non-IT person at a water utility. In fact, when we analyze actual cyber events that have occurred within the water sector, what we see are very basic lapses of cybersecurity practices. So things like, not revoking the remote access credentials of an employee who has been fired, or using something like Windows 7 as their operating system, which Microsoft stopped supporting a few years ago, and so forth. So in other words, effective cyber countermeasures can consist of pretty basic procedural practices rather than technological advancements. So requiring strong passwords, regular software updates like you do on your phone, having backup procedures, an incident response plan, being able to operate on manual, that sort of thing. So these are the kind of the types of low tech measures a water utility can take that are proven to be effective against many types of cyber attacks. Perhaps on the more technologically focused side, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they do offer a service called vulnerability scanning to see whether a utility has any vulnerabilities in terms of access from the internet that could be used to exploit a water system vulnerability and perhaps disrupt water services. So so it's largely a kind of a procedural practice, not necessarily high technology response that can be most effective. Over.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Well, the cybersecurity landscape right now has so many evolving threats, and many of the priorities across the government are focused on not just mediating them, but really staying ahead to prevent them. So, what do the cyber threats look like for EPA? Is there anything unique about the agency that is informing your cyber priorities?
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot. And you're right. There's so many threats out there. You really need to look at how to prioritize them, and so you can focus on those aspects of the threat. And what I do is I've used some of my military experience to apply what we call looking at the most likely course of action by an adversary and the most dangerous course of action. In this case, the most likely course of action, the most likely threat, I think, is related to the fact that EPA really isn't as high profile as some of these other agencies like the Department of Defense or State Department or Department of Energy. So maybe it's not very likely that someone is specifically targeting EPA on a regular basis, but I do think we present a target of opportunity to adversaries. So if a threat actor is scanning blocks of IPs on the internet, looking for vulnerable assets, maybe they have some kind of zero-day exploit in their pocket and they're looking for places to use it. If we're vulnerable, we're going to show up on their radar. And the fact that we're a .gov kind of puts that target on our back. And so even if they weren't originally going after the EPA, if we're vulnerable and we're a government entity, that really can bring a lot of attention to us and have them pursue us more closely to actually go ahead and try to exploit us. So with that in mind, defense in depth is certainly important, but we really focus on keeping that perimeter as secure as possible, because that's where the target of opportunities are going to be presented to an adversary. So they may not have specifically been going after the EPA, but if they see that we have that vulnerability, they're likely to go after us. And as far as unique aspects of the agency, I think if you ask most people, where is the EPA located? Most people would say, of course, Washington, D.C., like so many other agencies, which is true. That's where our headquarters is. But we're actually organized into 10 regions spread out across the country. Each region is doing their mission to protect human health and the environment within those regions. So, for example, there's that train derailment in February of this year in Ohio. Well, that falls under Region 5, which is headquartered in Chicago. So we have this geographically dispersed organization that has their own IT infrastructure, their own kind of nuances based on how they operate. Mm-hmm. So from an incident response and vulnerability management point of view, we're responsible for all of that. And one advantage we have to assist in that, to make it a little bit easier, is in each region, we have an information security officer or an ISO. So my team maintains a pretty close relationship with the ISOs to address any security questions they may have, or since we have that enterprise level view of things, if we keep on getting the same type of question from different ISOs, then maybe there's some kind of root cause we need to look into to fix some security. And also going in the other direction, the ISOs can act as like boots on the ground in that region to interact with some of the IT admins that they work with on a daily basis to help coordinate something like an incident response, or if there's a high priority vulnerability, instead of having to track down specific admins, we can just go to that ISO and they can help us kind of bridge that gap in getting things done at a regional level.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Well, can you tell me more about EPA's vulnerability management team and how it's helping to identify and manage vulnerabilities?
Sure. The Vulnerability Management Team, or VMT, is part of the Security Operations Center division that, as you said, it identifies and manages vulnerabilities at the enterprise level for the entire agency. So the first step in that is really getting information about vulnerabilities. That can come from a variety of different sources. So the primary one would be our internal vulnerability scanning capability. Like lots of organizations, we're constantly scanning our assets to identify any vulnerabilities, any assets that need to be patched. We also participate in CISA's cyber hygiene program, so that our external scanning, or they scan our external assets on a weekly basis. That's the same kind of vulnerability scanning that David mentioned for other customers. So that gives us that adversary's view of how do we look from the outside? What do we need to patch at a high priority because it's exposed to the internet? We also have a vulnerability disclosure program it's like a bug bounty program where security researchers are permitted to take a look at our websites, at our web applications, do some testing, try to find vulnerabilities or weaknesses, and then they let us know so that we can remediate the vulnerabilities. And related to that, we also have an internal penetration testing program where we have, again, cybersecurity experts who look for vulnerabilities from an adversary's point of view, do penetration tests of specific EPA systems. And the value there, just like with the vulnerability disclosure program, is you have that human expert who's able to go through some of these complex steps to find vulnerabilities that maybe wouldn't be discovered by just automated scans. So that's the first step of identifying it. We're not involved directly with the remediation. That's where we have EPA's IT operations team that has to actually do the remediation, fix the configuration, or apply a patch. But we still have a good relationship with them. What I usually say is we want to avoid just throwing the vulnerabilities over the fence. So what I mean by that is it doesn't help to take a huge spreadsheet of hundreds of vulnerabilities and blast it out to all the admins and say, okay, go fix it, especially with such a large organization. A lot of that is done by routine patching, like when Microsoft has Patch Tuesday, we know those will get done. But if we see a vulnerability that's especially prevalent in the environment, we'll work with the admins, let them know, let the system owners know that we're seeing this a lot. And if everyone does their part and patches those specific vulnerabilities, then it'll help reduce risk across the agency. That's usually an easy win if we're able to prioritize. And of course, our public-facing attack surface, like I mentioned, with what CISA's cyber hygiene scanning looks at, is exposed to attackers. So that's another thing we prioritize. If it's open to the internet, we want to remediate that as a priority. Make sure the admins know about that. So all this is pretty routine, and the real excitement, what I think is excitement anyway, in the security world, is when we get notified of something like a newly discovered 0-day or a vulnerability that is being exploited in the wild across federal agencies. Then we have a much higher response rate. We want to take care of that as soon as possible. So what that means is, if we get something like that and we see a combination of things, like it's a brand new vulnerability, it's being used against federal agencies, it's on an asset that's internet facing, it's something that we have, maybe a software or hardware device that we know we have. Once you kind of check all those boxes off, that's when we drop everything and go into a kind of crisis mode where we start looking at the inventory, verifying version numbers to see if we're vulnerable, reach out to the admins to let them know what's going on. And in that case, we've had situations where there's a high priority vulnerability. We'll put in an emergency change and get it done on a Saturday, because we don't want to wait until the next week. Because the longer you wait to remediate these vulnerabilities, the more opportunities adversaries have to take advantage of them. So that brings up another aspect of a successful vulnerability management program, which is that trust between the security team and the IT operations team that really does the administrative work that you're asking to do in remediation. You don't want to be the sock that cried wolf, where everything's an emergency and all you do is say that there's a constant crisis, because that kind of desensitizes the IT staff to what you're talking about. And they'll be like, okay, here are the security guys again, tell us the sky's falling. And they won't have that sense of urgency because we haven't prioritized things properly. Right. So what we really emphasize is having that strong relationship and trust with the information security officers, with the admins, with the system owners. So they know that if we're telling them that something needs to be patched, like right now, they take it seriously. They know that there's a serious risk to the agency, and it really works out great, because then they're really responsive in meeting the agency's security needs.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that great information. Well, what are some of the cybersecurity challenges the EPA is currently facing, and what cyber hygiene practices is the agency implementing to address them?
It's a good question. I think we face similar challenges to a lot of other government agencies, in that we have some legacy systems out there. It's common knowledge that the government doesn't always work quickly when it comes to acquisition and technology upgrades. So if you have a legacy system out there, it may lack some of those modern cybersecurity features that we take for granted today. David mentioned a water system that had Windows 7. That's not unusual. Something that's so old that isn't even supported anymore. You can't have that in your environment without additional additional security controls to mitigate those risks, because sometimes a system could be so old that if you upgraded it, it would break, and then you have a choice between having it secure or having it not work at all. So sometimes there's that trade-off. The good news is that we get a lot of guidance and advice from the Office of Management and Budget and CISA for best practices guidelines to secure these systems by adding on features if possible, features like multi-factor authentication, making sure that data that's in transit and data that's at rest is encrypted. We've done a lot with aggregating logs to help with at an enterprise level to assist in our incident response investigations. So you just don't have logs sitting on individual endpoints. You're able to bring them all together into a SIM tool so you can look at those patterns. You can see what's happening in the whole environment instead of looking at these individual logs. So, like I said at the beginning, since we're one of the smaller agencies, that also translates to a smaller security budget. But we have a really supportive CIO and CISO. They understand our priorities. They give us the resources we need to protect the agency's infrastructure. And we just have to do a good job of determining those priorities so that the most important aspects of security can be implemented. And another challenge, again, not unique to EPA, is our current hybrid model of working. We have people come in typically about once a week. So the rest of the time they're at home, they're outside of those on-premise premises security controls. So you don't have necessarily the firewalls and everything protecting their devices when they're on their home network. So when you have your employees in the office, you have that really robust perimeter security that you can control, but you have that strong outer boundary. Like so many other organizations, we do telework, so employees have to do their work on their own network. The way that we've addressed that is our IT team has done a really good job of building out a robust VPN capability so that it can handle the capacity of all those employees working remotely, to make sure that connection between their home and EPA infrastructure is secure. And we also try to inform employees that they should, do some basic best security practices at their home as well, like make sure your router is updated and that kind of thing. Additionally, it's kind of a rule that the end user can be the weakest link in the security chain. So with that in mind, we have recurring phishing exercises. So that's meant to help employees stay sensitized to the risks of phishing, because that's really one of the major sources of successful exploitation and security incidents is phishing. It's one of the most common attack vectors you'll see out there. So we do the phishing exercises, and we also combine that with training to show exactly what they should look for in phishing emails, how to make the right decision about whether to click on those links or not. So, for example, we have a phishing exercise, an employee clicks on the link, they get training available that will show exactly what they should have looked for in that phishing email, some of those indicators that it's not legitimate. Another bit of training we do is we conduct regular incident response tabletop exercises. So what this does is it lets teams go through a scenario, a cybersecurity event, or some kind of malware scenario that maybe they don't run into every day, something like a ransomware attack or a scenario, an exercise scenario where an advanced persistent threat gains a foothold in their system and starts pivoting to other systems. So we present them with that scenario, and then they walk through the actions they would take in response to that situation. What we found is that it often leads to improvements in their incident response plans. So maybe what sounded good on paper, once you actually go through the process, it turns out maybe that's not the best way to do things. So then they're able to make improvements to their plans. And another benefit is, we'll use ransomware as an example. You don't want the first time people, especially admins or system owners, to encounter ransomware to be a real ransomware attack. That's a super high stress situation. So we go through the steps, the incident response steps they would take, so that they're familiar with that and they're a little bit more comfortable. They have that confidence in their plan because they've been through it before. So that makes them better prepared if a major attack like that does occur.
Okay, that totally makes sense. Well, I wanted to ask both of you, is there anything exciting on the cyber front at EPA that either of you would like to share?
Sure. Yeah, one thing I like to share that's kind of on the horizon for us, we're expanding our existing vulnerability disclosure program that I mentioned earlier to include paid bug bounties. So our current vulnerability disclosure program depends on security researchers kind of doing it because they're interested in it, or they want some of that cybersecurity street cred, so to speak. They get our thanks. They get a spot on the VDP Platforms Hall of Fame. But to get those really high-performing security researchers who have invested a lot of time and effort in refining those skills, sometimes you need some additional incentives. So to address that shortcoming, we're planning a paid bug bounty event this quarter where we hope that we'll learn about vulnerabilities that are harder to find or maybe require a higher level of skill to understand and report on. So that's what we're all about, is finding those vulnerabilities so they can be remediated. And we think that giving that monetary incentive to report them will really increase the response that we've had in the past. So we're really excited about that, and we're looking forward to discovering some security issues we weren't even aware of before, so we can fix them.
Yeah, Nikki, from the Office of Water, where I work, with respect to our assistance to water and wastewater systems, I'd like to highlight just a couple of things very quickly. One is we have released a tool that water systems can use to self-assess their cybersecurity practices. It's free. It's on our website. It's called the Water Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, or WCAT. And we're encouraging states and technical assistance providers who are particularly, the latter are particularly prevalent at smaller water systems, and help them with technical capacity issues. They can use the tool when conducting a cybersecurity assessment at water systems. So this tool just contains, again, those very basic cybersecurity controls that are needed to build a strong cybersecurity program, and it is written for the non-IT professional, which is very critical when reaching out to some of the folks within our sector. The other one is, I actually want to reiterate that EPA will conduct, again for free, cybersecurity assessments for individual water and wastewater utilities through our cybersecurity evaluation program, and water utilities can sign up and register for this program on our website. And utilities can work with a cybersecurity professional virtually to complete an assessment using the tool I just mentioned, WCAP. And then after the assessment, utilities receive a comprehensive assessment report and risk mitigation plan so that they can begin to address the cybersecurity gaps that the assessment may have revealed and track their progress as they hopefully make improvements to their cybersecurity program. EPA has the capacity to conduct many assessments. We've had about on the order of 380 water systems and wastewater systems participate to date. And we have the capacity to handle many more assessments. So that is a great way for water systems to begin their path along the way to greater cyber resilience. Over.
Wow. Well, Doug and David, thank you so much for sharing that exciting news. I'm interested in hearing more about it in the future. I really am. Well, before we conclude, I just want to know, do either of you have any final comments or remarks that you would like to leave with our listeners?
I don't want to be an alarmist on this front, but I do want to underscore that cybersecurity does represent a substantial threat to wastewater and water facilities, because, as I said, they use automated process controls and electronic networks to monitor and operate virtually all aspects of their systems, and these processes are vulnerable to cyber attacks. And again, both the IT and OT sides of a water system are vulnerable to attack. The good news is, again, that I'd like to emphasize is that there isn't an expensive, technologically advanced remedy to this, but instead there are procedural, basic cybersecurity practices that water systems can undertake, many of which are at little to no capital cost, that can substantially reduce the magnitude of this risk. So water utilities have the ability to mitigate this risk, even though it is pervasive. Over.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I'm glad that we had this opportunity to share with the audience some of the steps that have been taken to secure both the water infrastructure and the EPA's infrastructure overall. I'm a firm believer in the EPA's mission, even though I don't directly, I'm not involved with it directly. But me and my team, we want to secure the EPA infrastructure so that the different scientists and geologists and attorneys and everyone are able to perform their mission and perform it securely.
That was a very informative and just all around great discussion. So, Doug and David, I really do want to just thank you and tell you that I really appreciate you taking out time to talk with me about what EPA is doing to protect our water facilities and everyone's drinking water, making sure that it's safe. So thank you so much for what you do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nikki. We appreciate your interest in the subject.
Yes, thank you so much.
Cybercast, along with GovCast and HealthCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.